today's development diary of Victoria II, House Divided, I will talk about the revolution. The revolution will come one day, and one day we will all be... Oh well, that was a wrong one. Well, the revolution in Victoria II had some drawbacks and some advantages. It was clear to see when something went really bad, but you had some trouble seeing why it was turning bad without going into a lot of details and sub-menus and analyzing data on yourself or by yourself. So there was one thing I really didn't like, because it was kind of clunky. You had like either the rebels were irrelevant or they were in a big uprising. There was no real thing in the middle. There was no real thing that these rebel factions did unless they did a military uprising. This worked fine for like the big huge revolutions, but for most of the things it just didn't fit. So it was kept going strong up and down in balance levels and never really fit. So we had to do something drastically and change how revolutions work. Basically, what we know as rebel factions in Victoria II does not really exist anymore. Now it's something we call popular movements. Popular movements can be two kind of categories. They can be focused on a reform or on a nationalistic movement. Political movements are first trying to work inside the system. They're working inside of a system, trying to achieve their goals, and it's only when they become extremely radicalized that a movement will turn into a military uprising. So how do they do then working within the system? First of all, a political or a reform movement, they will basically have the desire for one reform. They want to have that reform enacted. And the more pops that join this movement, the stronger this movement becomes. And eventually the movement increases the power and the effect in the country for that reform. So that first of all, other pops in the country will looking at saying that, oh, there's a big reform here. It's more likely that they will know about this one because of pamphlets being spread out, people talking about it, and they will create a kind of like a movement for people getting the vote or getting unions and being allowed to go in public meetings. All of these things will be strengthened when other people are agitating for it. We also changed how the upper house handles reforms slightly. In the original game, the Conservatives were objecting to reforms out of pure principles. They also had so that the higher the militancy level in the country became, the more likely they were supporting reform. This led to the kind of exploits that because of people objecting to slavery, you could enact whatever political reforms you wanted because people were upset, then you can enact whatever reform you wanted. So what we've done instead is that when a country has a big movement for a certain reform, then that reform alone will be what the Conservatives will allow to be enacted. They will not be concerned about any other political reforms or social reforms or so. It will only be the reform that the people are actually wanting that they will be concerned about. Of course, militancy will still affect the Conservatives. After all, they always are afraid of a big uprising. There's also the thing called radicalization here, in that the movement is not just working inside the system. A movement can be so disenfranchised and so angry that they will basically become radical and go into a military uprising. Every day, each movement is checked, and if their factors reached 100%, they will turn into a military uprising. So what increases these chances? Repeated suppression of the movement, there's different cultural abilities, naturalism, various technologies that increase types of movements, radicalization, and all those nice little things. Of course, the more political reforms you have enacted in a country, the less likely people are to become radicalized. So this means a functioning democracy like Britain has far less likelihood of radicalization unless there is a strong nationalist movement somewhere, while a country that autocratic, repressive Russia has more likelihood of getting a real big, let's say a communist revolution, like it happened historically. So what do you do with the popular movement? Well, first of all, you can always try to suppress it. You can use suppression points, and various movements have different costs on how they can be suppressed. You gain suppression points from technological abilities, or from the amount of bureaucrats you have, or for how you handle press meetings and how you handle press rights and public meetings. That's the correct one, not the other one. These points can be used for suppressing the movements, which will reduce their desire for the reform dramatically, or their desire for independence dramatically. But the movement gains a history of being suppressed, and when they grow again, they are more likely to become radicalized.